If you want to learn how to make games in Unreal Engine 5 from scratch, you've never done game development before, and you want a guide that teaches you everything that you need to know from scratch, then you're at the perfect place. We're going to start off with downloading Unreal Engine 5. We're going to learn the basics of the UI. We're going to learn lighting. We're going to learn materials, blueprints, all the stuff that you need to know in order to get started with making games. After we're done with the basics, we're going to make this FPS game that you're watching on your screen right now. It is an absolutely amazing game. The environment, we're going to build everything from scratch. We're going to learn how to make engaging FPS games that are very fun to play, and they also look visually impressive as well. This project will not only teach you a lot of skills that you need to know in Unreal Engine 5, like how blueprints work, how you can sort of add functionality and logic to your game, but it's also going to give you an amazing game that you can add to your portfolio, or you can even publish on Steam. After we're done with this project, we're going to be moving on to our next project, which is going to be this sci-fi third-person game. We're going to learn how to implement a character, how to set up a shooting system, how to set up a whole combat system with active enemies that chase you and attack you. We're going to set up entire health systems for the character and for the enemy players as well. And we're going to learn a whole lot of other things, such as how to make a heads-up display, how to add a mini-map, how to set up timer systems, how to sort of work with sound design in Unreal Engine 5. We're going to learn a whole lot in this project as well. I genuinely feel like this is the perfect opportunity for you if you want to start game development in Unreal Engine 5. You don't know anything about Unreal, you want to get started, this is your place to start. So I don't know what you guys are waiting for. Just start this course today and add game development to your portfolio. Alright guys, welcome to this course. I hope you guys are super excited to learn Unreal Engine 5. I personally am very excited because Unreal Engine 5 is such a good software, such a powerful software, which is also super easy to use as well. So it's going to be a great experience for you guys. So first of all, let's start with how to download Unreal Engine 5. You're just going to go to the internet. You can search for Unreal Engine 5 download. And once you do that, just click on the first link. Make sure it's not an ad. And if you click this, it should take you to unrealengine.com, and here's the website. So the first step is basically to download the Epic Games launcher. Epic Games is basically the parent company of Unreal Engine, and essentially you're going to download their launcher, and in that launcher you can download Unreal Engine 5. So just click download launcher button right there. And while that's opening, let's take a second to look at the system requirements. Make sure your PC, whether it's a Windows PC, Linux, or Mac OS, make sure that these system requirements are met, because otherwise Unreal Engine 5 is going to be super slow on your computer, and it's going to be extremely frustrating. So I would definitely recommend you to have a PC which has at least these system requirements. So alright, so the Epic Games launcher has downloaded, and let's go ahead and install it like that. And you can just essentially just install like that. I'm going to cancel it because I already do have it installed, so I'm not going to install it once again. Yep, I will cancel that, but just follow the wizard and download the and install the Epic Games launcher. So once you have that installed, what you can do is you can just open it. So I'm just going to search it in my start menu, and once you open the Epic Games launcher, you're going to see Unreal Engine right there. So click that, and then we can go to library right here. And here are all of our Unreal Engine 5 installs. Now I have 2 versions installed, but obviously you won't have any versions installed, right? So you can just press this plus button right there to add a version, and then select the latest version that is available to you. At the time of recording, the latest version is 5.6, but if you're watching this in the future and there are any new versions of Unreal Engine 5, then be sure to download those. And if there are any major changes in that version and 5.6, I'll try my best to make a new course, but yeah. So let's go ahead and download that. Once you have the version specified, you can press install, and it is going to start installing. So once Unreal Engine 5 has downloaded on your PC, what you can do is you can press launch right there. And once you press launch, it should open, and it is going to take a bit to open, especially if it's the first time that you're opening it, but I'll see you guys when it opens. So once the Unreal Engine launcher opens for you, it's going to show you all your recent projects here, but I'm assuming that it's a fresh install for you, so you won't see anything here. What you have on the left side, however, is a bunch of different presets, or essentially pre-existing projects that you can open, and essentially templates that you can customize to make your project. So you have the first category is games. You have a whole bunch of games. In fact, we're going to be using this first-person template to make the game project that is in this course. Apart from that, you have a third-person template, you have a top-down template, a vehicle template, virtual reality template, and also a handheld AR template. And you have a blank project as well if you want to start from a clean slate. Apart from that, if you want to use Unreal Engine 5 for film and video production stuff, you have a lot of different projects in that category as well. Similarly for architecture and automotive rendering and all that stuff, and simulation as well. However, we're going to be starting with a blank games project for now, just so you guys can understand the basics, and I can teach you guys, the basics of Unreal Engine 5. After that, when we actually work on the project that is in this course, we're going to be switching to a first-person project. So for now, I would recommend you to open a blank project. So you can just select that, and in the settings here, make sure it's set to Blueprint, because we're not going to be covering C++ in this tutorial. That is going to be slightly more advanced. Blueprint is a visual scripting language in Unreal Engine 5, and it makes coding your games a lot easier. here compared to C++. So we're going to be using blueprints. Target platform can be desktop, that's fine. And quality preset, I'm just going to set that to maximum. And then you can name your project whatever you want. I'm just going to name this UE underscore basics, and then you can specify where you want to save your project. But once all that is done, we can press create and our project will start. So Unreal Engine just opened and this is what it looks like. This is the UI. Now, if you're a beginner, it is obviously going to look a bit intimidating because, you know, there's a lot of buttons. There's, you know, if you right click anywhere, there's a lot of options. And obviously it is, you know, it looks complex, but trust me, 90% of the things we're not even going to touch. Like most of the time, we're going to be using only 10 to 20% of the software, and it's going to be relatively simple for you. So don't worry. It's going to be pretty easy, and obviously there is going to be some parts which are, you know, slightly hard, but especially for this beginner tutorial, I'm going to keep it pretty simple and it's not going to be very hard for you. So let's start with the basic introduction of what everything is and how everything works. So I'm going to be introducing you to the four main parts of your software, four main UI parts. The first part is going to be this one right there. So this is the viewport. It is essentially where your game is displayed and where you can, you know, place your items, design everything, and you can also play your game here. It is basically a window to your 3D world if you want to think about it like that. After this, we have the content browser. This is basically the same thing as your Microsoft File Explorer. So if you know this File Explorer thing right there, this is exactly the same as your content browser. You have your folders and everything, and these folders are actual folders in your Unreal Engine project directory. So if you want to open any of these folders inside of your actual File Explorer, what you can do is you can right click any folder and you can say show in Explorer, and it's going to show you that specific folder inside of your Explorer as well. So these are actual files which are present on your computer. Apart from that, any assets that you have, let's say if you import any 3D models or anything like that, everything is going to be visible inside here, and all the blueprints and everything is going to be in your content browser as well. We have this Fab button as well. Fab is basically a content marketplace where you can get a lot of different, you know, types of assets, a lot of different types of environments, models, and all that stuff. And it is pretty cool. We are going to be going over that in just a bit. However, after that, after your content browser, you have your outliner. So what your outliner is basically all the items inside of your viewport or inside of your scene are going to be listed down here. So let's say in our scene, we have a landscape, right? You can see it says landscape right there, and this is your landscape. We have, if I look up, obviously you don't know how to look up yet. I'm just going to be going over the navigation tools in just a bit. But for example, if I look up, you're going to see that we have clouds, and it's going to say volumetric clouds right there. So these are our clouds. We have a sky. So we have the skylight and the sky sphere. We have an atmosphere. It says we have an atmosphere right there. We have some fog in our scene. It has fog. And we have the sun, which is our directional light. So everything that is present inside your game, or inside your viewport, inside your scene, is going to be listed down here. And it is very important to keep your outliner organized and clean, because if you want to say look for anything, any specific object, and you can't see it in your viewport or can't find it, your only option is basically to just look through the outliner and find that object. So the outliner is pretty important. So lastly, we have our details panel. Now what this does is basically if I select any object, in my outliner, you're going to see that it is going to populate the details panel, and it's going to show me a lot of different properties and a lot of different sort of attributes of that object that I can change. So the details panel is extremely useful because you can essentially tweak anything of any object basically. So let me just show you an example. So for example, if I have, let's say we have the sun, right? And I want to tweak the brightness of my sun, for example. So I'm just going to select the directional light, and I'm going to come down to my details panel. And here you can see that we have this intensity slider. So if I can make it super intense, you can see that it's going to become pretty intense, or I can just make it 0 lux, which is going to make it completely dark. So you can tweak a lot of properties for different objects, for specific objects in the details panel. And let's say you change something and you don't know which value it was before, you can just press this undo button right there, and it's going to undo it and reset it basically to its original value. So yeah, that is the details panel. Now let's talk about moving in your viewport and how exactly can you look around and sort of move and all that stuff. So the way it works is that to look around, you press and hold your right mouse button, and then after that is pressed, you can look around, and it's gonna just allow you to do that. How do we move forward and backwards and up and down, all that stuff? You basically press and hold your right mouse button, and then you use your WASD keys just like you would in an actual game. Now you won't really notice that I'm moving because the camera speed is way too slow. So in order to increase your camera speed, what you can do is you can go up here to these settings right there, and camera speed is set to 1 right now. So you can increase it to maybe something like 8. And now if I just move forward, you can see that we are able to move like that. And how do you go up and down? You basically use your Q Q key to go down, and E key on your keyboard to go up. So WASD to move forward, backward, right, and left, and then Q to go down and E to move up. So pretty much like you would in like an FPS game or something. So those are your controls. Now these controls are going to be slightly hard for you, especially if you're coming from any other 3D software. For example, if you're coming from Blender, in Blender, you're used to like an orbiting system. You orbit around different objects. But in Unreal Engine 5, because your maps are super big, there's no single object that you want to orbit around most of the times. Most of the times you want to like sort of just roam around or sort of move quickly around throughout your scene. It is going to take some time to get used to, but once you do, trust me, the Blender system is going to feel super weird. That's what happened with me. Initially, it was super hard for me to adjust to the Unreal Engine 5 system, but once I got used to this, now whenever I use Blender, it feels super weird. So don't worry, you're going to get used to that. But yeah, so that's how you move and essentially just navigate your viewport. Now let's talk about manipulating objects in your scene. So for example, if you have any objects, how do you move them? How do you scale them, rotate them, all that stuff? We're going to cover that next. So for that, we're going to have to add an object first. So let's go ahead and go to this add menu. This is a menu where you can add all sorts of different things. We're going to go over it in more detail in just a bit. But for now, I'm just going to go to add. I'm going to go to shapes right there. And I'm just going to add a cube. So if I add a cube, you're going to see that we have a cube randomly in the air. So I'm going to also reduce my camera speed because it was pretty fast. I think 1 is a bit too fast too. So I'm just going to go below 0.1. I think should be good. I'm going to be teaching you guys now how you can sort of move different objects, rotate and scale them. So by default, you're going to see this these 3 lines right there. So the green line is essentially your y-axis. The red line is your x-axis, and the blue line is your z-axis. So you can essentially move your object along these lines by clicking and holding that specific line and then moving your object along it. And I don't know if you guys can properly see it or not, but so there's one square which is half green, or like one side of the square is green and one side of the square is blue. If you click that, you can essentially move your object along 2 different axes as well. So if I come to this side, you can see that this square in the middle right there, one side is red, one side is blue. So you can move your object along the Z and the X axes. And similarly, if I go to the top, you can see that with the green and red axes as well. Perfect. So you can move your objects along multiple axes as well. So now that movement is covered, let's move on to the next tool, which is going to be rotation tool. So for rotation, you can go up to your left-hand side. So the top left side of your screen, and you're going to see this rotate tool right there. The shortcut to this is pressing your E key on your keyboard. Also for the movement tool, the shortcut is W. So remember that, or you can just keep clicking up there as well. That's perfectly fine. But for now, we're going to go to the rotate tool, and similarly, just like the move tool, the rotate tool gives you 3 axes, and you can essentially rotate your object along those axes however you want. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. There's not really much else to talk about. Let's move on to the scale tool now. So for the scale tool, you just click this button right there. And the shortcut for that is your R key on your keyboard. And the scale tool is interesting because you have all those options. So for example, you can scale up in your Y-axis, Z-axis, and X-axis. And you can scale up in 2 different axes as well. But you can also, if you basically hover over the center, the cube in the center. So if I just go closer, you can see that there's a cube in the center as well. If you hover over that, it's going to allow you to scale up in all axes basically. So uniformly scale your object. So this is what we're going to be doing most of the time, because when you, if you know anything about textures, if you scale an object disproportionately, what happens is that your textures get messed up, and it's generally not good to sort of just scale your objects in different axes. You should mostly scale your objects in uniform axes. So we're going to do that. But yeah, so those were your basic movement, rotation, and scale tools. So now I want to cover some other parts of the UI that we're going to be frequently using. One of them is this add option right there. So you can add a lot of things, a lot of different things from this option. One option that you have is adding shapes. So you can add different types of shapes, and you can, texture them, add them in your scene, all that stuff. You can add shapes from here. You can also add lights from here. So if you want to have any sort of light in your scene, you're probably going to be using this add menu. I'm not going to be covering lights right now. There's going to be a whole dedicated section in this course in which we're going to be covering lighting and how to make your scene look better with lighting and all that stuff. Apart from that, we have in this basic menu, you have some other things like you have actor, which you can use for many different reasons. You have character pawn. These are essentially the characters that your player is going to control and all that stuff. Apart from that, you also have a player start. Wherever this is, your player essentially starts at that point, starts playing at that point. Apart from that, we have in cinematic, we have cameras, we have level sequences and all that stuff. We're going to be covering all of this in detail later on. But for now, just know that in the add menu, you have a lot of different things that you can add. And in volumes, you have a lot of these different volumes that you can add. So, there's a lot of things in here that you can add in your scene. Apart from that, we also have this mode setting. So right now we're in selection mode. We can also go to landscape mode where we can, if I just open that and wait for it to do its thing. In landscape mode, you can essentially sculpt landscapes. So for example, if I want to, make this landscape, like modify this landscape in any way, I'm going to be increasing my camera speed first so I can go closer. So if I go closer like that, you can see that I have a brush and I can sort of just, paint with that brush and, sculpt landscapes and like make mountains and all that stuff. And you have different sort of brushes here. So if you want to erase something, you can erase that. It's just gonna basically going to just reverse what you did. And you can also smooth things out, and you can flatten things. And you have a whole bunch of different options and settings here that you can sort of play around with. We're not going to be covering landscape making as much in this course, honestly, because we're just going to have a basic landscape and we're going to be building our game in that. However, you can definitely play around with these settings. And honestly, it's not that hard. It's just, there's different types of options that you have. So you have strength, which is essentially, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's going to control how strong your brush is. You have your brush size, your brush fall off. This is going to control how big your brush is. The size will control how big your brush is, and fall off will control how smooth your brush is. So if I do something like that, you can see that mountain is pretty smooth. But if I reduce my fall off, you're going to see that it's going to become very blocky and very sharp. So you have different options here. I think we covered everything important in the sculpt mode, landscape sculpting mode. But yeah, you can experiment with this and just, find out different things that you want to do. Apart from that, we also have this foliage mode. What foliage mode is that we're not going to be using it right now because we don't really have any foliage, but you can use it to add grass to your scene, add trees and all that stuff, to scatter stuff around. You can use it to add a large amount of any sort of object in your scene. You can use the foliage mode for that. But we're going to be using this other tool called PCG, procedural content generation. That is a faster way to generate environments, and it's a newer way as well, but you also have the foliage mode if you want. Apart from that, we have a mesh paint option. This, honestly, I've never used, and I personally don't even know what it does. So you probably won't need this either, especially at a beginner level. We also have this modeling mode. If you want to model something in Unreal Engine 5, I don't know why you would, but just in case you want, you have these tools here as well. I would definitely recommend you to model stuff inside of Blender or any other 3D software, and then bring them inside of Unreal Engine 5 and just, not modify the meshes as much. That's what I would recommend, and that's what I personally do as well. And then you have fracture mode, brush editing mode, and animation mode. These I've personally never used. I've never needed to use them. Even if I'm making an animation, I can do them just fine inside of selection mode. So you don't really need those specific modes. So yeah, those are some of the modes that you have. Apart from that, let's move on to some other settings here. So you have snapping. What snapping is that if you look at this magnet icon here, what snapping does is that, let's say I'm moving something. So let me, for example, add, let's go to shapes and let's add a cube. For example, I'm moving this cube. Oops. Yeah, okay. Let's say I'm moving this cube, right? You can see that it sort of snaps and it is moving in increments of 10. You can see that if you look at this location value right there. So if I change it, you can see that it's increasing in increments of 10. So if you want to do that freely, like if you don't want there to be any snapping, you can just turn it off. So just go here and turn off location snapping. And now you can freely move it without having any sort of snapping. So you can turn this tool on in certain cases. In a lot of cases though, it is very, very important. So I wouldn't recommend you to just turn it off all the time, but I would recommend you to, turn it off sometimes if you want to make any precise movements. And similarly with rotation and scale as well. So right now if I rotate, you're going to see that it is going to rotate in increments. But if I turn off snapping, it is going to let me, oops, my bad. It is going to allow me to freely rotate. So that's those are essentially your snapping options. Apart from that, you also have this option. What this does is that it basically snaps objects to surfaces. So for example, if I'm moving this down, I'm just going to select this cube and move it all the way down. I'm just going to get it super close to the landscape so I can demonstrate this. So let's say I move it somewhere ahead, something like that. It's basically just going to snap down to the surface right below it. So that's also a useful tool in some cases. If you want to just, change the position of anything in, let's say, the X and Y axes, and you don't want to worry about the Z axis, you can just drag it somewhere and then it's going to automatically snap to the ground. So that's also a useful option. But definitely very niche, and like you only use it in certain situations. And also all those snapping options that you saw inside the snapping menu, you also have them right there. So this is location snapping, and you can also change the number of increments. So for example, if you set this to something like 500, it's only going to increment in every 500 meters or whatever unit you're using. So basically, yeah, that's what it does. You can also change the value of your snapping, and similarly rotation, you can change the number of degrees to snap to, and you have a lot of different options here, and similarly for scale as well. So yeah, these are basically all the options you have up there. Another option that I want to cover is this one right there. So this is your coordinate system. What this does is that basically, let me just give you an example. So let me reduce my camera speed as well. I'll give you an example. So let's say you're trying to rotate this. Let me go to my rotate tool. And let's say I'm trying to rotate this cube, right? Right now, the x-axis of this cube and also the grid, whole world is the same, right? It's all the x-axis. But for example, I was rotated like this, right? Now I can rotate it from this angle, like this sort of slanted angle. But what if I want to rotate it along its own x-axis? To do that, what I do is I just click here and it's going to switch to local space coordinates. And now I can rotate it along its own axes. I hope that makes sense. If you want to rotate it along the global axes, then you press it and make sure that it shows this globe right there. Then it's going to rotate in the global axes. But if you want to rotate it along its own axes, then you click that and basically change it to object coordinates. So yeah, those are pretty much all the settings, all the important settings that you have up there. Apart from that, let's move on to the right side. So right side is also important. You have some different options here. So let's click this perspective first. You're going to see that we have different orthographic views that we can use. So for example, if I want to look at this scene from the top, I press top and it's going to switch to an orthographic top view. And it's going to show me everything in wireframes. And it's going to show me everything from up above. So, and I can also have different views as well, obviously. So I'm just going to switch back to perspective. Apart from these, you also have some other options like field of view of your perspective. So you can increase that. It's going to punch in your camera and it's going to make everything super zoomed in. Or you can increase your field of view and it's going to make everything super wide, like an ultra wide lens. So you have this option. I generally set it to the default, but you can set it to whatever you want. And yeah, apart from that, I don't think any of these other settings are that important. I personally have never really had to use them. And the only, I think, important option is this high resolution screenshot. You can essentially take a screenshot, a high resolution screenshot, and save it on your computer if you want. This is used for rendering images, for example, of your game or any scene that you're making. So that's a good option. You can obviously take a screenshot of your viewport as well, but it's going to be low quality. So if you want the best quality, then you can do this. It is going to take a bit, but you can see that now we have this high resolution screenshot saved. Perfect. So that is an option that you have. Apart from that, camera speed, obviously we have covered that. You have these different view modes then. So what this does is that essentially you can, right now we're in lit mode, which is obviously everything is lit up, everything is textured and all that stuff. But if you want to see your scene without lighting, you can go to unlit mode and it's going to show you everything without all the lights. So if, let's say, your scene is super dark, or let's say you have a lot of different lights and it's getting distracting for you, you can set it to unlit mode. And also another use case for this is also if your scene is super slow, if you have a lot of assets in your scene and your scene is getting super slow, or you have multiple viewports, for example, you have, 2 different viewports, then you can set one of them to unlit and it's going to be a lot easier on your computer and it's going to give you it's going to give you much better frame rates. So that's another use case for this. You have different modes here as well, wireframe mode and, collision. Where's collision? You have visibility collision and all that stuff. I personally have never had to use any of these, but you can view your scene from different, perspectives if you want. You have a lighting only view, you have detail lighting and all that stuff. And I think there's one for reflections as well. Yeah. Reflections. You can see all the reflections in your scene. It basically assumes as if everything in your scene was made of glass, and it's just going to show you how that would look. So yeah, this can be useful in some situations. Apart from that, I think yeah, we've covered pretty much everything that is important, at least on a basic level. So let's just go back to a lit mode. Let's move on to this next option right there, this eye. This has a lot of different options that you can turn off or turn on. So for example, if you want to look at your scene without the environment, you can turn off your environment like that. You can turn off your cameras, clouds, and all that stuff. You have a lot of different options here that you can choose. And you can turn off fog. You can, turn off all your skeletal meshes, static meshes, and you have a whole bunch of options, and you can turn off your landscapes. Again, I personally have never had to use this, but I can imagine some niche situations where you would want something like that. So it's important to know. I think it's good to know that you have these options in Unreal Engine 5 just in case you need them. And yeah, then you have some performance options here. So you can change your viewport scalability settings, which basically means how good your graphics are. If you set this to low, everything's gonna look like a PS3 or PS2 game. And if I go and set it to cinematic, it's gonna look the absolute best that it can look. So again, it's going to come with a performance cost. If you set it to cinematic, frame rates are going to be low. If you set it to low, the frame rates are going to be high. So, it's just a trade-off that you have to deal with. And oftentimes when I'm like making my game, when I'm editing stuff, I oftentimes set it to something like medium, because that's going to give you like a decent quality, but also it's going to give you like pretty good frame rates. And then when I'm about to like export my game, I obviously change it to the maximum quality. You also have this other option, which is material quality level. You can set it to low if you want. Again, it's going to reduce your material quality and it's going to improve frame rates. Or you can set it to the highest, which is going to reduce frame rates but give you the best quality material. So yeah, and also you have the screen percentage option. So if you custom override this, you can basically increase this to increase the resolution of your scene, which is going to make everything look crispier. Everything's going to look sharper. There's going to be less artifacts and all that stuff. If, for example, I set it to 100 or even above 100 if you want, it's going to make things look better, but it is going to come with a massive FPS cost. So just bear that in mind. And when you're making your game, you're like, editing stuff, you can set it to even something like 40 and it should be fine. And you can see some, I don't know if you guys can see it over video, but on my screen, I can notice some areas reduce in quality, but obviously performance is going to increase. So I'm just going to turn that off for now. You have your project settings and editor preferences here. We're not going to be covering that for now. If you need it later on, then we're going to cover it. But I think for now, we have covered pretty much everything that is important in your scene. You have some other options here. You have blueprint classes. We're going to cover blueprints in a bit, but I think that is a bit more advanced. So we're not going to be going over it for now. You have your level sequence options, so you can add, if you want to make an animation or a cutscene or anything like that, you're going to add your level sequence from here, and you can play your game from these options as well. If you play this, if you press that, it's going to give you, it's just going to throw you in like a first-person character, and you can just, use your normal controls to roam around and all that stuff. If you want to export your game, if you want to package your game, what you can do is you can go to platforms, and you can select any platform that you want, let's say Windows, and then you say package project. We're not going to be obviously doing that right now, but I will show you guys how to do that after we're done making the whole game. So yeah, we're going to cover that later. I think we are pretty much done with all the important parts of our UI, at least the ones that I could think of. Obviously, there might be some that I missed, but we are going to be covering them as we move on and as we need them. I just wanted to keep this short because I know it is going to get a little boring if we're just, covering setting after setting. So most of the things I want you guys to learn while making actual projects. So it's also interesting and engaging, and you guys enjoy as well. So if you're enjoying this course so far, please consider leaving a review. I work really hard on these courses to make them engaging and more, interesting for you guys. And I hope you guys enjoy this course in its entirety as well. Let's go ahead and move on to our next part, which is going to be adding custom assets in your scene and basically, adding different objects, different meshes and all that stuff. So you have multiple options of doing that, multiple ways of doing that. One option is to use Fab, which is your internal marketplace of Unreal Engine 5. You can find a whole bunch of assets on there and it's super easy to import. You just click download on any asset and it's automatically going to import inside of Unreal Engine 5. The other option is to actually go on the internet, go on 3D model websites like Sketchfab or CG Trader or any of these websites, get a model from there and then import that inside of Unreal Engine 5. That is going to involve a couple of more steps because oftentimes the materials are not applied by default. So you're going to have to apply the materials. You're going to have to tweak the materials oftentimes as well. So I'm going to be covering both options. Let's start with the Fab one because that is just easier. Just click Fab for now and it's going to open this marketplace. I'm just going to make that full screen. I think it might ask you to log in or sign in to your Epic Games account the first time you open it. I'm not really sure though. If it asks you to do that, just do it. And then you can see that we have a whole bunch of assets there. Most of them are going to be paid. Actually, a lot of them are going to be paid, but also a lot of them are free as well. So we're only going to be using free assets in this. Now let's say you want something. Let's say you want like a chair or something. Okay, just search for chair, and you can also you can see that we have a lot of good free options. However, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to price, this price filter, and I'm just going to say free. And you can see we have a lot of good free options. You can also specify different styles, and you have a lot of these different filters that you can have. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go with this one right there, modern chair. So I'm going to go with that. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say add to project, and it is going to automatically download it. You can see it downloads, it's downloading right there, and it's already done. And if I decrease the size of this, you can see that we have inside of content, we have a fab folder, and inside there we have a modern chair folder, inside which we have this static mesh. So there's two types of meshes in Unreal Engine 5. There's static meshes, and then there's skeletal meshes. Static meshes are any objects that are basically not rigged or not animated. Skeletal meshes are objects that have a skeleton and they can basically be animated, they're rigged, and so that's the difference. So now what we can do is we can just drag this chair onto our scene, anywhere on our scene. But you can see that this chair is imported, however the textures are not correctly imported. So that is a problem with Fab. A lot of assets on Fab are not going to work perfectly with your Unreal Engine because they're made for different Unreal Engine versions, or they're made for different softwares. So that is a problem that we are facing in Unreal Engine currently, and Epic Games is facing a lot of criticism for that because the Fab marketplace allows a lot of different assets, a lot of low quality assets to be published on the website. So that is a problem that we're facing right now. But for now, just, choose something good. And if you don't like it, or if you don't have the textures and everything, then just don't use it, I guess, because that's the only option we have. I think I'm going to go with this chair then, because that one's not working. And add to project. And the good thing about this is that everything is already set up for you. So you don't have to sort of import anything manually or save it on your computer and all that stuff. But if you just open this chair folder, static meshes, and then we have this chair right there. And I think this one has all the materials and everything applied. So we're just going to scale it up. And yeah, you can see that the materials are applied and it looks pretty good. Yeah, I think it looks pretty decent. So that's how you can import different static meshes from Fab. You can also import materials from Fab. You can import entire scenes from Fab. We're going to be covering that later on, not right now. For now, I just want to cover static meshes. And so we can cross this out. And now I'm going to be covering the other way of importing static meshes, that is from the internet. So for that, we're going to go to Google Chrome. Just go to this website called sketchfab.com. And I'm just going to go to the home of Sketchfab. And here you have a whole bunch of different models. And Sketchfab is personally my favorite website for getting models. And I think they have a lot of different high quality models, and they're available in many formats as well. So that's pretty good. And you can search for pretty much anything. I'm just going to search for, let's say, chair again. Make sure you turn on downloadable for this, because for some reason Sketchfab allows models that are not downloadable. So they're just for showing off, I guess. And they don't let you download them. But if I move down, and I think I'm going to go with this one, rustic chair. Perfect. I think it's a pretty good model. Credits for this model go to Aaron, my bad. But yeah, so we have this model. We can click download 3D model, and you have a lot of options here. So for Unreal Engine 5, you need models in FBX format. I think you can also import OBJs, but I'm not sure if the textures are going to be fine with that or not. But what I usually do is, if I don't have an FBX format, I just download it in GITF format, and then I take it into Blender and I convert it into an FBX file, and then I import it in Unreal Engine 5. So that's what I usually do. You guys can obviously directly import OBJs in Unreal Engine 5 as well, but I'm just going to be showing you guys the longer way because that is going to teach you more, because I think importing it directly is pretty simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to download the GITF file. So GITF, download that. I think it's actually called GLTF. I don't know why I've been calling it GITF, but I recently found out that it's actually called GLTF. But yeah, I mean, they look pretty similar. So yeah, I'm just going to be selecting everything inside this folder. That's the folder that we just downloaded, copy it. And I'm just going to go to my desktop and create a new folder. I'm just going to call this UE5 _ basics. And I'm just going to save everything inside there. So I'm just going to create a new folder, call it chair, and save it inside there. So for GLTF files, the main file that you need is scene.gltf, but obviously you need these others as well. So I'm just going to open Blender. And again, this you can do in any 3D software. You don't have to use Blender. I personally use Blender, so I'm just going to be covering that in this course. But again, you can do this in any software.
One thing I want to mention here is that even though knowing Blender is not a requirement for this course, it's definitely recommended that you know at least the basics of Blender. That's going to make things a lot easier for you. And even if not Blender, just know any 3D software other than Unreal Engine 5, a software where you can, you know, model things, import things, convert file formats and everything. It is definitely recommended to know any other 3D software before learning Unreal Engine 5. So if you want to learn Blender 3D, I do have a full course, full beginner's course on Udemy about that as well. So you guys can go check it out.
All right, so I'm in Blender and I'm just going to delete everything. And then I can go to File, Import, and then GLTF. And I'm just going to go to Desktop and go to where I had that saved. And we can just import our scene.gltf file. Again, this process is going to be different if you're using any other 3D software. But even if you don't use any other 3D software, you can simply just ignore this part, just skip this part, and just go to Sketchfab and basically just download the OBJ file. This is just an optional part for those who use Blender or 3D softwares. Okay, so once you have this, what you can simply do is you can go to File, Export, and then export as FBX. So we're just converting this from GLTF to FBX. That's literally all we're doing. Go to that same folder, and I'm just going to call this chair.fbx, export it. And then now we can go inside of Unreal Engine 5, and I'm just going to be creating a new folder in my content folder. I'm just going to call this chair, and then I can go to my file explorer, go to the folder where I had that saved, and then just drag the chair.fbx inside of your content browser. So once you do that, it's going to give you some options, leave everything to default, and then click import. So all your textures and everything are imported as well. However, in case your textures are not imported, I'm going to be showing you guys a way around that as well. But for now, you can see that I can just drag my chair in my scene and scale it up. And then I can just move it up like that and bring it forward. Cool. So that's how you import stuff from outside Unreal Engine 5. Now, how do you set up materials? We're actually going to cover that when we are learning how to make materials, but you essentially get all the textures that you need. So you have a whole bunch of different textures. And then what you can do is you can just plug them into a material. We are going to be covering how to do that in just a bit. So I'm not going to cover that right now. That's basically how you import different models in Unreal Engine 5. So I think our next step is going to be learning how to add materials to objects and how to light your scenes. So let's go ahead and get started with that. All right, so let's start with lighting in Unreal Engine 5. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my content folder and I'm going to create a new level. So the way levels work in Unreal Engine 5 is that basically this whole thing that you're seeing right now is a level. And then you can create different levels as well. So this level is right here. It's saved right there. And if I go to File, I go to New Level, and then I can create a new level, which can be with an open world preset, empty open world, basic, or empty level. I'm going to start with empty level because I want to show you guys everything from scratch, how you can sort of build pretty much this exact scene. Not exact, like not with the mountains and everything, but like you can build a realistic outdoor lighting scene inside of Unreal Engine 5. I'm going to show you guys how to do that from scratch. So I'm just going to select empty level, and then I can create. And now you can see that we have a brand new level right here. There's only a grid, there's no lighting, nothing else is in our scene. So first things first, I'm just going to press Control S on my keyboard and save this level. So at this level, I'm just going to call this UE_lighting because we're covering lighting in this level. Let's go ahead and start with creating a basic lighting setup, basic outdoor lighting setup. And that is super easy in Unreal Engine 5. All you need to do is you need to go up to Window right there and click this thing called Environment Light Mixer. If you click that, it's going to give you this this new window, and it's going to give you a few options right there. So we're just going to click all of these one by one. So we can click Create Skylight, Directional Light, Atmosphere, Volumetric Cloud, and Height Fog. And once we click all of them and I cross it out, you can see that we have a whole lighting setup ready with a sun right there, some clouds, a sky, and some fog and everything. So that is how outdoor lighting works in Unreal Engine 5. It is super simple. I am going to show you how to tweak this and I'm going to show you guys what each of these things that we just added do and then how you can sort of change them. So first things first, directional light is your sun and you can rotate it however you want. So if I rotate it like that, you can see that you can create like a sunset effect and it's automatically going to change the color of the light based on the position. So you can create like a sunset effect. And you can even make night like that. And yeah, and we're going to be making day. And you can obviously change the position however you want. So that is that. The next one is going to be exponential height fog. This basically just gives you some fog. So if I turn it off by clicking this eye icon right there, pressing the eye icon on any of these is going to basically disable them. So if I do that, you're going to see that our fog or our sort of environment or like, you know, our atmosphere sort of just disappeared. So this is what this gives you. And you can also select your exponential height fog, and you can go down to the fog density and you can increase it. It's going to make everything more foggy, or you can reduce it to 0, and that's something you can do, right? So I'm just going to undo it like that. And you have different options as well. You can turn on volumetric fog. This is something that I would definitely recommend you to do. It just makes your fog more realistic. So I'm going to do that. The next thing in the list is your sky atmosphere. If I turn this off, you can see that it really takes away the atmosphere in our scene and it makes everything black and white. So that is what this does. Atmosphere really makes the sky blue, and it also gives you the control to change the color of the sky. So you can make the sky pretty much any color you want. If you're making like a fictional sort of game, you can sort of tweak this. But I think if you're making a realistic game, you wouldn't really want to mess with this. You can also make your scene like an overcast day using the sky atmosphere, because if you increase the my scattering scale, that's going to make everything overcast. So something like that. You can see that it looks like an overcast day now. If we had any objects in our scene, in fact, let me just add an object so that you guys can see. Let me add shapes. Let's add a cube, and let's move here. I just want to show you guys the impact of different lightings on different things. So I can just scale that up like that. And then I can also add another cube on top of it, so we can see like the shadows and everything of this. So let's place it right there. So you can see this is how it looks. If I go ahead and reduce my, if I go to my sky atmosphere and set the my scattering scale back to default, it looks more like a, like a regular day. But if I increase it a lot, you're going to see that it's going to look like an overcast day basically. So that's how you can do this. You can also modify the atmosphere height. A higher atmosphere is just going to make things look different. And lower atmosphere is also going to make things look different. So these are just some things that you can tweak around with, and you can just play around with them and see what looks the best for your specific scene. And yeah, there's a lot of different things there. We're not going to be going into too much detail, but yeah, that's a basic overview. Your skylight is basically like the main light in our scene is your sun. However, everything is sort of reflecting off of the sky as well, right? So this is what gives it sort of that soft lighting effect, and it's what lights up the shadow parts as well. Otherwise, the shadows would be completely dark. So let's turn off skylight. You're going to see that everything, even the especially the shadow parts, are much darker, and there's not a lot of light being reflected off of the sky to light up the shadow parts. So this is what does that. And make sure to turn on real-time capture in your skylight. Otherwise, the results are not going to be that good. So yeah, that's the main thing. Apart from that, we can go to volumetric clouds, and these are basically your clouds. You can change the appearance in any way you want. So you can change the layer bottom altitude. You can increase that. It's going to give you more skies, and you can just make different types of skies with this. The flexibility you have with this is pretty good, and you can change your layer height and your tracing distance, tracing start max distance, and there's like many different options that you have here. So yeah. You can play around with this as well. Apart from that, we have, I think that's pretty much the important things. There's a cloud material as well, which you can modify to change the appearance of the clouds and the colors and everything. But I'm not going to be covering that for now. So that's how you do natural lighting in Unreal Engine 5. Now we're going to be covering artificial lighting and how you can add custom lights to basically light up indoor scenes, or let's say night scenes, or just any light that wouldn't occur naturally. Let's have that. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be deleting all of this. So this whole outdoor lighting setup, I'm just going to delete everything, but I'm going to leave the cube, and like both of the cubes, I'm going to leave them so we can actually see the impact of the lights. And we're going to go to add, and we're going to go to lights. And you're going to see we have a whole bunch of different lighting options. Direction light is basically just a sun. That's the exact light that we had in our scene. Point lights, if I just add that, you're going to see that it's basically just going to be one point, which is illuminating light. So if I just increase it, increase the height of it, you can see that it's just one point, which is illuminating light in all directions. And you can increase the intensity here in the details panel and just modify the intensity. And you can also change the attenuation radius. So this radius around it, this sort of sphere around the light, this basically determines how far your light can go. If you increase this, light is going to go far. If you reduce this a lot, you can see that the light is going to be more focused, and it's not going to sort of travel that far. And for now, I'm just going to set it to default, but that's an option that you have. You can also increase your source radius. So if you know anything about lighting, you would know that the bigger your light source is, the larger your light source is, the softer your shadows are. If you've done, let me actually go ahead and show you guys an example. Light source size versus shadows. I'm pretty sure there's going to be good comparisons on the internet, you can see that in this in this object, in this in the left side, you can basically see that the light source is much larger, so the shadow is a lot softer. And in this one, the light source is much smaller relative to the object. That's why the shadow is much sharper. The reason for that, if you want to go into the physics behind this, is basically that a source that is smaller than the object is not going to create a penumbra, and it's just going to have the umbra. If you've done physics in high school, you would probably know this, but a bigger source is going to create a penumbra because the light, that's how light works in real life. So that's how it works in Unreal Engine 5 as well. If you increase your source radius, you can see that if you make the light bigger, the shadow you can see here is getting a lot softer. So if I go back, source radius 0, shadow is completely sharp. As I increase my source radius, my shadow will also basically become softer. So that's one thing that you can play with. So that's why you have the source radius, and you can increase your size of your object. And also you can increase your source length as well, which is just going to make it like a cylinder, and it's going to make it taller and taller like that. And that is also going to affect your shadows as well. So you can also use temperature. So that's a way to sort of change the color of the light. You can make the light blue by increasing your temperature, or reducing it is going to make it orange and yellowish. So yeah, that's an option that you have. If you turn off affects world setting, it's just not going to affect the world. And if you turn off cast shadows, it's not going to cast any shadows. So those are pretty self-explanatory. Now, because this is a 3D software, it's not completely accurate based on real life. You have these options, which are sort of, which you can use to sort of just fake lighting. And the way it works is that your indirect lighting intensity, you can think of it as how much your shadows are lit up by the object. So the parts of this cube or the surface that this light is directly lighting up, that is the direct lighting intensity that you can change by, adjusting the intensity. But the parts that are covered by shadows, those parts, like the brightness of those parts is going to be controlled by your indirect lighting intensity. So if I increase that, you're going to see that my shadows are going to become much brighter. So let me just zoom in real quick so you guys can see better. So you can see that this part is pretty bright, but if I reduce this indirect lighting intensity, it becomes pretty dark, right? So generally, if your scene is looking a bit too contrasty or it's looking too dark, then you would probably want to increase this. But do note that this setting is not natural. It's basically a way to sort of cheat lighting. So it is pretty easy to go overboard with this and make your scene look a lot more unrealistic. So yeah, you would definitely want to be careful with this. Just try to use it to make your scene look realistic, but don't go overboard with it. And then we have our volumetric scattering intensity. What this does is that this basically controls the fog in your scene. So right now we don't have any fog because we don't have the exponential height fog element in our scene, but we can go ahead and add that. So let me go to add and say fog, search for fog, and then we can have exponential height fog. Just drag that in your scene. I'm just going to move it down so it doesn't disturb us. But once we have this, we can go down and turn on volumetric fog, and you can automatically see like some fog there. But with this, if I go down, yeah, with the volumetric scattering intensity, you can control the amount of fog we have. So if you increase this, your light is going to emit a lot of fog, and there's going to be a lot of fog in your scene. And if you decrease this to 0, there's going to be pretty much no fog, or like there's going to be some fog because you can't go below 0.25, but there's going to be very little fog. So yeah, that's a setting that you have. I think we have pretty much covered everything that is important. There is some other stuff as well here, which I'm not going to go into detail right now, but if we need it later on, we're going to cover it while we're doing our project. But yeah, so that's the point light. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete this point light, and we're going to add the next type of light, which is going to be a spotlight. So spotlights are self-explanatory. It's basically just a spotlight, and you can control it. So let me just place it like right there. You can control your intensity. You can control your light color. You can control your inner cone angle. So there's an inner cone which is going to have more focused light. So you can change the size of that, and you can also change your outer cone angle. So that is going to be so beyond this outer cone, there's going to be zero light, absolutely zero light. So you can control that as well. And your source radius, again, similarly like the point light, the bigger your source is, the softer your shadows are. So just keep that in mind. And I think pretty much everything else is the same, so I'm not going to be going over it again. So let me just delete that. Our next light is going to be the Rect light. This is personally my favorite light because this is the most realistic. If you're doing pretty much any scene, the most realistic option that you have is a Rect light because it's an actual light source that you can add to your scene. and you can angle it in different ways, and you can, make your scene look a lot better, a lot nicer. So this is what I use mainly. So I'm just going to be placing it right there somewhere. And again, with this, you can change your intensity, light color. So let me just make the color like yellowish, orangish, yellowish, something like that. And then you can change your source width and source height. And similarly in this as well, the bigger your sources, the softer your shadows will be. So if I make the source like really big, something like that, you're going to see that it's going to look, the shadows are going to be much softer. So, and you also have this barn door outside of it. So this is similar to how actual movie sets have real lights. They also have barn doors, so you can change the length of the barn doors and also the angle. So they just focus more light on your object. So that's an option. Although I usually just set it to 0, honestly. And I think everything else is also the same, but I just personally like the look of rect lights and also point lights. So I use both of them in different scenarios, but most of the time I would say I use rect light. So let's delete that. And I think that is pretty much it. Yeah, we have skylight as well, which we covered before. This is your skylight, the one which you added with the environment light mixer. So I'm not going to go over it again. But I think that was pretty much it for the lighting. All right, so now that we know the basics of lighting, let's go over something very, very important. That is your post-process volume. So it's a volume that you can use to essentially post-process your scene and add different effects and stuff. And I think it's one of the most important things to make your scene look better and make your scene look actually good and realistic. So let's go over that and let's cover it. So for that, I'm going to go to Window first, and I'm just going to go to my environment light mixer and just add all the lights, add like a basic outdoor lighting setup so that at least we have something to work with. So if you notice, by default in Unreal Engine 5, the way your exposure setting works is that it's auto exposure. Let's say you look at a very bright object, for example, the sun, your scene is going to get darker and your exposure is going to get darker. But for example, if you move and go to like something very dark, let's say this scene, your exposure is automatically going to get brighter, and then it's going to reduce when you go out of that scene. So I'm not sure if it's super visible or not, but if you go to someplace very dark, your scene is automatically going to increase your exposure like that and make it look brighter. So yeah, that's what I mean. That's how it works basically. We can change this. We can set it to manual exposure. For that, we're going to need a post-process volume. And I mean, that's just one thing that your post-process volume can do. You can do many, many other things with it as well. So let's go to add. Let's search for post-process volume. So it's going to come up like this, and it's going to be like a cube. It's going to be a volume basically. And by default, the way it works is that it's only going to affect when you are inside the volume. It's only going to affect the world when you're inside the volume. If you get out of it, it's not going to affect anything. But you can change that. You can change it to basically be unbound, and you can set it to essentially affect the whole level. So we're going to do that. So for that, I'm going to go to search. I'm going to search for unbound. And you're going to see this thing called infinite extent, and in parentheses, it's going to say unbound. So just check that. And now everything in the scene will be affected by this post-process volume. So we can just move it down and, get it out of sight so that it doesn't disturb us. But if we cross it out, you can see that we have a whole bunch of different settings, settings that you would have in any sort of video editing or like color grading software. And you have a whole bunch of things to tweak with. So let's start with the first thing that we're going to be covering, which is going to be exposure. So if you turn on this metering mode, it's going to say auto exposure histogram by default. You can set it to manual, but it's going to turn things super dark. So what you can do is you can go to your exposure compensation, and you can increase this to set an exposure for your scene. So if you set it to something like 9, now the exposure is going to be constant for your whole scene. I think 9 is a bit dark, 10 should be good. So let's say you set it to 10. Now, even if you go to the dark part, it's not gonna, and it's gonna make your scene a lot more sort of predictable, and it's gonna make it easier for you to sort of make different tweaks, because your view is not gonna be changing all the time, so it just makes everything a lot better. So I just set it to manual exposure. You have some other options here as well, but I personally have never used these. So let's go ahead and move on to the next thing. So let's go to bloom next. Bloom, if you know, is an effect. It's essentially fog, and it makes things look shinier or dreamier in a sense. So you can add more of it, or you can remove it if you want. So I'm just going to turn on two settings right there, method and intensity. So you have standard method, and then you have convolution method. So if I increase the intensity of standard, you can see that everything is going to look a lot dreamier, and everything's going to have a glow around it. So that's an effect that you can have in games. And I think a little bit of bloom makes things look more realistic, because bloom actually happens in real life as well in cameras. So That's an option that you have. You can also change it to convolution, which in my opinion looks a lot more realistic. Like you can see that the bloom in the sun changed completely. If I set it back to standard, it's just a glow, but that's not how it works in real life. If you point a camera towards the sun, this is more likely what you will see. So we're going to set it to convolution, which is more realistic in my opinion. And you can also increase your intensity for that as well. And it's going to have that sort of, I think, I'm not sure what it is, but like you can see that like some parts are green, some parts are pink around it. And it just makes it look a lot more realistic in my opinion. So I think that's a pretty good setting to turn on. So now everything that is brighter than, a certain amount of brightness is going to have this glow around it. After that, we can go and add some chromatic aberration. What this does is that basically, if you've recorded with a camera, what happens is that at the very edges, there's a little bit of separation in the green, blue, and red channels. If that makes no sense to you, that's perfectly fine. I'm just going to be showing you an example. So if I increase the intensity of it, you can see that if I set it to 5, you can see around the edges, like when an object is in the middle, it's like mostly fine. But as it moves closer to the edge, I want you to look at this cube. The color channels of this object are separating, and it makes it look like it's this glitchy effect. So now in real life cameras, there's a slight bit of chromatic aberration by default. Especially the cheaper your camera is, the more chromatic aberration it's going to have. So just adding something like 0.2, something like that, just makes your scene look a bit better. And if something is at the very edge, there's going to be a slight separation, and it's going to make it look, just that much better. So once we have this done, we can go down to the next important setting, which is going to be lens flares. I know I'm skipping some because I personally never use them, and I don't think most game developers in Unreal Engine 5 use it, but you have those options that you can explore them on your own. Lens flares, what they are is that, the name is self-explanatory. If you turn it on, it's going to give you this lens flare effect. I think it's too intense for now, so I'm going to reduce intensity, something like that. But I think a slight bit of lens flare is just going to make it look a bit better, and it's going to, if you're especially playing a game, I think lens flares really add a lot to it, and it makes it look much more realistic. I think the intensity is a bit too much still. Let me just lower it like that. So we have, just a slight bit of a lens flare, not a lot. I think that looks pretty good. You can also change the tint of your lens flare. So if I move here, you can make them different colors if you want. So that's an option that you have. But I think you would only want to do that if you're making like a stylized game. In realistic games, you probably wouldn't do that. You have some other options here. Then we can move on to your color grading setting, which is my personal favorite. So I'm just going to be placing my camera somewhere there, and we can sort of color grade this shot. So let's change the temperature first. You have your white balance option, and then you have your temperature option. So you can make your scene warmer like that, or you can make your scene cooler. So you have different options. I think I'm just going to make it a slight bit warmer. And you also have tint as well. So you can, make your scene green or purple. You have your options there. I think I'm going to give it this like filmic look, which is like yellow and green and stuff like that. And then after that, we have this global setting, which gives you option for saturation, contrast, gamma, gain, and offset. I mainly just use saturation and contrast. So I'm just going to be using those for now as well. I'm going to increase the contrast something like 1.2, maybe even 1.4. That's going to make it look, more contrasty and just better, in my opinion. And then you can increase your saturation as well to maybe 1.2. And, you can see that you can really sort of make your scene a lot different, and you can add these color effects based on, whatever you want to do. And then you can change your gamma, gain, and offset as well. I'm personally not going to do that. And then you have your shadows, all these settings in your shadows as well, all these settings in your midtones and highlights as well. Yeah, so these are your color grading settings. I'm not going to be going into too much detail for now because this is just supposed to be an introduction. We are going to color grade our game, like, the scene of our game, we're going to grade it. So, you guys are going to learn a lot in that as well. But for now, I think that should be pretty much it for your post-process volume. You have some settings down here which are important, but we're going to be going over it later when we're post-processing our game. I don't want this part to be too long. I know it's getting boring because we're, doing setting after setting, but please just try to push through this part. I assure you that the game itself is going to be a lot more fun. And yeah, so these are some settings which we're going to cover later on. So yeah, that was pretty much your post-process volume. You can see that you have a lot of different options there. If I turn it off, this is how your scene looked before, and this is how it looks with your grading. So, you have a lot of freedom there. You can do whatever you want. So that's what your post-process volume is for. So now I think we can move on to our next part, which is going to be adding materials and modifying materials and all that stuff. Alright, so now let's learn a bit about materials in Unreal Engine 5 and how you can make materials, how you can customize materials and all that stuff. Now there's something I want to tell you guys before we start this. Now realistically, as a game developer, you rarely create materials yourself because if you look at like the structure of like a game development company or something like that, the task of game developers is not to create materials and it's basically to use different assets provided to them, different materials, different meshes provided to them to create games from, right? That being said, you need to know how to modify materials and you need to know how to work with materials, which is why it's extremely important for you to know how to create materials, you know? So even though 99% of the times you won't really be creating materials from scratch, you do need to understand how materials are made so you can modify them, if that makes sense. And yeah, the reason why I'm telling you that is because a lot of people, a lot of beginner game developers, they sort of overlook the importance of knowing how to use materials. So I think it is extremely important that you at least understand how they're made. So let's go to, let's say, let me create a new folder. I'm just going to call this materials. Okay. And now what we can do is we can go close to our cube and we can basically, in fact, instead of a cube, let me just add a sphere. So I'm just going to go to shapes and sphere because that's going to, I think spheres just portray materials better. That's why they're mostly used for material previews. So we're going to be using a sphere as well. And, oops, my bad. Let me place my camera somewhere here so that we have like a good balanced lighting. And let me go a bit closer as well to the object. Something like that should be good. Okay. Now what we can do is we can right click in our content browser and we can go up to material right there. So if you click material, it's going to basically create a new material for you. I'm just going to call this material underscore tutorial because I'm just going to be showing you guys how material creation works. And let's save everything, by the way. So this is this button you're going to press to save all the assets. And you can also press Control S on your keyboard to basically save your level and your progress so far. So let's go ahead and open this material. And what's going to happen is that if I make this full screen, you're going to see that we have on our left side, we have a material preview and you can see that we have a details panel here. This is similar to the details panel right there. And on the right side, we have this sort of node workflow where we can create materials. So you can see that we have different sort of properties here, which we can either plug in values, like just type in values, or plug in nodes. So you can see that there's Unreal Engine uses a node-based workflow. The way nodes work is that you essentially take stuff, you essentially create nodes and then you plug them. So let's say I want to change the color of this, for example, right? The color of this material, that's the most basic thing. I have two options. Either I can click this thing right there, the color preview ahead of base color, and then I can specify any color and it's gonna, if I press OK, the material is going to become of that color. The other option that I have is basically have an image texture or a color texture and then have that node and then plug that into the base color. So I'm going to go ahead and add a color node. Normally the way you add nodes is by right clicking and then you have a whole bunch of options here and you can basically search for a node and add that specific node. But if you want to add a color, there's a shortcut for that. You press and hold the 3 key on your keyboard, number 3, and then you left click. If you do that, it's going to give you this node in which you can double click this and specify any sort of color. Let's say I specify this color. You can see that no matter what I do here, it's not really going to affect our material. The reason for that is because if I press OK, you're going to see that this node is not plugged in. So what I need to do is I need to take this and plug it into the base color. Once I do that, the value there is going to disappear. It's not going to exist anymore. And the base color is going to be specified by this specific node right here. So pretty much everything in like all the properties here, you can control with nodes. And I'm going to be covering like what these properties are and how you can sort of change them. Let's go over these settings for now. And then I can show you how to add image textures and all that stuff. So the first setting that we have is metallic. It's pretty self-explanatory. Basically, you specify how metallic your object is going to be. Usually, you either set this value at 0 or 1, but in some cases, to get more realistic results, you do have to use some values in between. But if I just set this to 1, that our object is now instantly more metallic. It just feels more metallic, you know? And if I set this back to 0, you're going to see that it's much less metallic. So yeah, you can control your metallicness of your object with this value. Specular is basically how reflective your object is. So for example, if I set this to 0, you're going to see there's going to be absolutely no reflections. It's going to be completely matte or completely, you know, like a dull surface. It's not going to reflect at all. But if I set this to 1, it's going to be, you know, more reflective. You can see that there's more reflections. Although there's a better way to control reflections, that is the next option that we have, which is roughness. I'm just going to set this specular back to 0.5, which is the default value. Now, if I set the roughness to 0, you're going to see it's going to become completely reflective. You can see that it's basically an orange colored mirror, if that makes sense. Like it almost feels like a car paint or something like that. So yeah, you can make this, or you can set the roughness to 1. That's going to make it super rough and it's not going to reflect anything. So for now, I think I'm going to set roughness to something like 0.2. Now, if you're new to materials in general, I would recommend you to not set the roughness value, or for that matter, any value, to absolute 0 or absolute 1, because in real life, even if you talk about colors, if you talk about roughness, specular, nothing is absolute 0 or absolute 1. It's always a range. So for example, if I want to make my object black, right? What I would do is I would never make it completely black. I would always make it like a really dark gray, if that makes sense, because that's going to make it look more realistic. Because in real life, as I mentioned before, nothing is absolute black or absolute white. Similarly, if I'm trying to make it white, I would make it a very light gray, like something like that. Now, yes, it's a minor thing. It probably won't matter as much, but it's just a good practice to sort of stick to realistic values. So similarly for roughness, even if I'm making the most reflective thing in the world, I would never set it to 0. I would always set it to the minimum I would go is 0.01. You know, because it's going to add that slight bit of, I want to call it a realistic effect, but I'm not really sure how to like describe it. But generally, I would recommend you to not set it to absolute 0 or absolute 1. I'm just going to set it to 0.2 for now. I think that should be good. Or maybe even 0.1. That's going to be good. Next up, we have anisotropy. This is not something that we normally use with materials, so I don't think you should worry about it for now, at least on a basic level. After that, we have emissive color. So emissive color is basically, you decide how emissive or how bright your object is. So this property would basically make your object like a light, you know, like a light source. So if I set this to, let's say, a bright green, you're going to see that our object, even though its color is white, it feels as if it's almost emitting like a light green light, if that makes sense. And you can see that the world around it is also getting dark because it's auto exposure and it's adapting to that. So if you want to convert your objects into lights, you can make them. You can add the emissive color property. Now, how exactly do you control the brightness or the intensity of this light? You're going to have to use nodes for that. So what we can do is we can press 3 on our keyboard and left click to create a color node. And then we can just specify any color. Let's say we do, for example, we do like red. Okay. So I'm just going to make it completely red. And then I'm just going to plug this into my emissive color. Again, it's going to be red, but we don't really have an option to control our intensity. So how exactly do you do that? The way to do that is basically to press 1 on your keyboard and then left click. And that's going to give you a value node. It's just a float number, like it's a decimal number. So it can be, let's say, 2.0 or, 10.0, whatever, it's just a random number. And what we're going to do is that we're going to take this color, we're going to multiply this by this value, and it's going to give us, and if you plug that answer into the emissive color, it's going to give us this color, but twice as bright, or this times bright, essentially. So that's how you do that. So you drag off of this and you say multiply, search for multiply node, add that. And in the B value, either you can just write your value or you can just drag this and plug it in like that. And now because this is 2, if I plug this in through the emissive color, it is going to be twice as bright. Okay, I don't know if it's visible or not, but let's say I set it to something like 20. Now you're clearly going to see a difference because it's way brighter. So I hope it makes sense. I know it's going to be a bit confusing for beginners, but the way it works is that if you want to increase the intensity of your emissive color, you take a color node, you multiply it with a float value, and then you plug the answer into the emissive colors, and that's going to give you the result that you're looking for. So that's how it works. And there's a lot of math in materials as well. Obviously, you don't need to understand advanced math for materials, but just sometimes it is good to sort of know basic math and like how sort of things work and all that stuff. But I'm not saying that you need to be good at math or anything like that. It's going to be pretty straightforward. After that, we have opacity and opacity mask, but they're grayed out. The reason for that, also I'm going to unplug this, by the way. So the way you unplug nodes is hold Control on your keyboard and just drag off this and just leave it there. Click off of it and it's going to basically just disconnect that node. So emissive color, I'm just going to set this to black because we don't want any emission. So now the reason why these are grayed out, the opacity and opacity mask, is because if I go to my details panel, my materials blend mode is set to opaque. that means our material right now is basically opaque, right? But for it to have an opacity setting, opacity you would know is basically how translucent or how transparent your material is. Your material blending mode will need to be translucent for that. So if you set it to translucent, so now you have access to the opacity option. If you want to just set it to something like 0.4, you're going to see that your material is going to become less opaque, but you do lose access to some other options as well, so you need to keep in mind the trade-offs. Now, the reason why you lose these parameters is because when you switch to translucent, what happens is that Unreal Engine internally uses a different shading model, and that model doesn't fully support properties like metallic, roughness, specular, all that stuff. So unfortunately, this is a limitation that we're having right now. There are some workarounds to this, but I'm not going to cover those in this course because this course is mainly aimed towards beginners, and those methods do involve some advanced techniques. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Just keep that in mind that if you set a material to translucent, you can't really have metallic, specular, roughness, all those things. And generally, like, you rarely have to ever use translucent materials. And even if you do, most of the times you don't even need these properties. So I think it should be good. I don't think it's going to be that major of an issue. Let me just set it back to opaque. You can see that there's other materials as well, other options as well. So yeah, but we're just going to set it to opaque, and that's going to be good for us. So after both of these settings, we have the normal setting. Now, normal is something that really makes your materials look realistic by allowing you to add imperfections to your materials. So the way it works is that obviously in real life, nothing is perfectly smooth, right? Like this, everything has some sort of imperfections, some grooves or something like that, you know? So those things you can add with your normal. Now, I'm not going to be covering it right now, but when we cover how to add image textures and, like, you know, multiple textures and PBR textures specifically, then I'm going to be covering normal. So we're just going to do that in just a bit. But for now, I just want to go through these other options as well. So tangent, we're not going to be covering because that's not really important for us. So after normal, the only other important thing that's left for us, at least at a basic level, is ambient occlusion. So ambient occlusion, what it is that basically it is the shadow produced when two objects are extremely close together. So let me just show you an example. So I'm just going to search for ambient occlusion, and I'll just show you a demo. So you can see that without ambient occlusion, this is how objects look, because they have shadow, but they don't have shadows of multiple objects being close together. But this one, you can see, looks a lot more realistic because it has ambient occlusion. So you can basically either turn on ambient occlusion for your material, or you can turn it off as well by you know, setting it between 0 and 1. But also what this is mostly used for is plugging in predefined ambient occlusion maps. So for a lot of textures, you would know where ambient occlusion would be. And so you can create a texture map, which would just have all the positions where ambient occlusion would be. And basically this would tell it where to add those shadows. So if that doesn't make any sense, that is perfectly fine. Everything will be a lot clearer when we actually import materials in this. So in fact, let's go ahead and start doing that. So now let's say we have like a brick wall or something, okay? How exactly do we add that brick texture to the wall? It's actually pretty simple. You just drag in image textures and then you sort of plug everything in, and it's going to look super realistic. So let's go ahead and start doing that. But for now, let me just apply this. And also, to apply a material to an object, the way you do this in Unreal Engine 5 is selecting the object. Then you go to your details panel. Inside materials, you're going to see this element 0 right there. And it says basic shape material. This is not the material that we want. We want this material right there. So you just drag it in, drag it on top of this, and just leave it there. And now you can see that our material has been applied. It's much more reflective and it looks pretty good. So that was our material. Now we can move on to adding different image textures. So let me just go ahead and add a cube, because we wanted to have like a brick wall, right? So I think a cube would be a more suitable object for that. So for this, we obviously need image textures. So let's go to the internet and find textures. So what I did was I went to the internet and I searched for PBR textures. Now what PBR means is basically physically based render. And it's essentially a bunch of texture maps, a bunch of images, which would make your texture look a lot more realistic as opposed to just having an image. So for example, if you look at this, you can see that there's like actual depth in this. You can feel like the material is actually 3D. This is what PBR textures are. And what we're going to do is that we're going to go to this website called Free PBR Materials. So if you go to this website, you can find a lot of free PBR materials which you can apply to your objects. So the one that I'm going to be getting is this one, Victorian Brick PBR material. I think it looks pretty good and the quality is pretty nice. So you can see that there's multiple downloads available. I'm going to be downloading the UE version. UE is basically Unreal Engine. They have a Blender version and a Unity version as well, but we're going to go with the Unreal Engine version. So once you download this, you're going to see that inside the zip folder is going to be a folder inside which we have a whole bunch of textures. So we have an albedo texture. Albedo is basically base color. AO is ambient occlusion. Height is displacement. Metallic is metallic, and normal is normal. And then we have roughness. And this is just the preview of the material. So if you open that, you're going to see that it's just an image. So what we're going to do is that we're going to select all of them, Control C, copy, and then I'm just going to be going into this UE basics folder, and I'm going to say, I'm going to create a new material, call it brick underscore matte material, and just paste everything inside there. And then if I go inside Unreal Engine, we need to basically import all those textures in here. So we can right click the materials folder and create a new folder, call it brick wall underscore wall. And then here we can drag all of these in like that. So we don't need the preview texture. So what we can do is we can just select that and delete it. Doesn't matter. And the rest of them, obviously, we're going to be using. So let's go ahead and create a brand new material, which we can customize and apply all these textures to. So right click here and we can go to material, add that. And right off the bat, we can just select our cube and apply this material in here so that we can really see how it looks in real time. So go close to it like that. I think that should be good. And then we can open up the material and start applying the textures. So the first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to select all the textures. So select one, shift select the last one to select all of them basically, and just drag them in like that. And it's going to import all of them as image textures. So these image textures are also nodes which you can connect to the material. So I'm just going to be resizing this a bit so that we have more space to work with. And let's start with the first one, which is going to be the albedo. It says the name right there, albedo. So you take the RGB channel of that albedo and just plug that into the base color. And that's going to give you this brick texture. So you can see in the real one, it's not updated yet, but if you go ahead and press apply here, it should update. And you can see that already looks pretty good. It looks like a brick wall, but there's no actual depth in this. There's no like real it doesn't look realistic at all. So then we can go back and now we can plug all of these in. So this is ambient occlusion. If you plug this into the ambient occlusion, it's going to make it look more realistic. So you can see the difference is subtle, but it does make it look better. So just apply that. Now we're not going to be using the height in this because it is pretty resource intensive. You're going to need a very, very strong computer for that. And I just don't think it's necessary because it actually displaces the geometry and physically adds the texture. So we're not really going to need that. Next one we're going to use is the metallic. So plug this into the metallic like that. Doesn't really change much, but just add it. Next up, we're going to do the normal. I think the normal is going to change quite a bit. So if you plug the normal texture into normal, you're going to see that if I apply it, I want you guys to look at this brick wall and just see it change. So you can see now it looks a whole lot better. You can see the difference is literally day and night. It actually looks so much better. Let me go ahead and disconnect it and then connect it again so that you guys can see a difference. I'm going to apply it. So you can see this is what it looks before. It literally looks so flat and it looks pretty fake. But if I plug in the normal, you can see it actually looks real, you know, it looks a lot better. So normal is what makes things look a whole lot better. And I think it's probably the most important texture out of all of them. And lastly, we have, I think this is roughness. Name is right there, roughness. Yeah. So I can just go ahead and take the RGB channel of this and plug it into the roughness. So if I plug it in, if I apply it, you can see that it looks pretty good. However, in my opinion, it looks a bit too reflective. It looks a bit too shiny. So if you want to increase the roughness of any object, you can do that pretty easily. The way you do that is by multiplying your roughness texture with an integer. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to multiply this. I'm going to add a multiply node. Multiply. And then this B number, I'm just going to set this to 2. Because that's going to make it twice as rough. And then you plug roughness in and it's going to be more rough basically. So you can see that this is a lot better. And that is essentially how you add textures. I hope you guys understood it. I think it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. And yeah, you just take all the textures, plug them in, and that's pretty much it. So another way of adding textures in your scene is getting pre-made textures, or, you know, just textures which are already like the work is done for you already. So you can find those on Fab. So let's go to Fab. And here we're gonna, if I just look for, say, brick wall, we will find some brick wall textures. You can see that there's a lot of textures here. Some of them are paid, some of them are free. So let's go ahead and set the price filter to free. And now let's select this one. I think that looks decent, but maybe this is better. Not really. How about this? I think this is better. You can select your quality of the texture that you want. I think I'm going to go with high quality and then add project. Once you do that, it is going to import the texture, but it's going to be already made. So you can just go to materials and just apply this material directly here. And it's going to do everything for you. You don't have to like plug anything in like manually or anything like that. It's just going to apply the texture automatically for you. And I think it looks pretty decent. So yeah, I guess those were the basics of materials in Unreal Engine 5. I think you should be, I think you should have a basic understanding of how materials work in Unreal Engine. Alright guys, now we're going to learn blueprints. What exactly are they? Why do you need them? And how you can use them to basically add functionality to your game. We're going to be covering everything from scratch. So it's going to be relatively straightforward. Let's go ahead and save everything in this project first. And then I'm going to basically close this project out and we're going to create a new project. So let me just close everything. And then we can open Unreal Engine again. So the reason I want to create a new project is because so that we can basically have a first person template, which will come with some pre-made blueprints, and it's just going to make it easier for you guys to understand blueprints. So let's go to games and let's get a first person template. Make sure to set the variant to arena shooter. Because if you get the survival horror one, it's going to be a completely different project and you're not going to be able to follow along. So just make sure to select arena shooter. Quality preset, I'm going to set it to maximum. Target platform is desktop, and make sure to set it to blueprints. You can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call this Unreal Engine Beginner. Also, by the way, if you're watching this video on YouTube, this video is a part of a full course in which we learn Unreal Engine from scratch and we learn how to make a very good looking FPS game. So be sure to check it out. The link is going to be in the description. But yeah, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and create this project and create. Perfect. And I'm just going to wait for it to open. Then I'll see you guys. So you can see this is what we have. This is a project. And this is not really the level that we want to go into. So we're going to go into variant shooter. And then we're going to go to level arena shooter. So if you open this level, it's going to send us to the level that we actually want to be in. So now what exactly this is basically it's a pre-made game for you guys. If I just click play, you're going to see that we're just going to be like this first person character inside this world, and we can get weapons. So, oh yeah, this is a jump pad. We can jump. We can go and get weapons from here. And then you can shoot your AI enemies and basically they're going to die. And it's essentially a pre-made game for you. It's a template. It's a pre-made sort of blueprint, which you guys can use to build upon and create your own game. So that's the idea of this. We're going to be using this template to understand some basics of blueprints and how blueprints work. So what blueprints are is that blueprints are essentially a way to sort of program your game or code your game in a visual way. So you can think of blueprints as coding or adding, logic to your game, adding functionality to your game, but in a visual node-based workflow. So let me give you an example of how blueprints work. So you can see that we have a blueprints folder. If you open this, you're going to see that we have a couple of folders here. So let's go to first person and let's open our first person BP_FP shooter. Now what this is that this is basically the character that we had. If I go to viewport here, you're going to see that that's our character that we were possessing and we were playing as. And we have these different sort of tabs where we have some code which does, various tasks. So you can see that it's a node-based workflow. Everything is basically nodes connected to each other. And it is going to be super intimidating for you guys. I know it was extremely intimidating for me as well. Just seeing all this stuff at once is just super, it just looks like it's difficult. However, I want you guys to trust me when you are actually building stuff. It's super intuitive and it's way, way better than coding. It's much easier than coding. And I think you can get stuff done pretty fast and like pretty easily compared to actual C++ coding. So this is what Blueprint looks like. I just wanted to show you guys how it works and how it looks. Now we can cross this out and we can create our very own blueprint from scratch, and we can implement a functionality of, let's say, opening a door, for example. Okay, so let's go back to our content folder. In fact, let's go to variant shooter, and then let's go to blueprints, and here we can create our own blueprint from scratch. So let's right click anywhere, and then we can select blueprint class right there. And then you have a whole bunch of different blueprint types. We're going to be selecting actor for now. Actors are basically any objects that are in your scene that perform a certain task. So they're called blueprint actors. And pawns are actors that can be possessed and that you can control as a player. Characters are also similar. They have the ability to walk around, as it says right there. Then you have player controller, game mode base, and a whole bunch of different other classes, which we're not going to be covering for now. We're going to go over them later on. So let's go ahead and add an actor. That is the most simple version of a blueprint. And I'm just going to name this door. Alright, so this is Nafi from the future, and I was actually editing this video when I realized that the concept of blueprint actors could be explained a bit better. So I'm going to try again, and I'm going to give you guys a better understanding of what an actor is in blueprints. So an actor is pretty much any object that you can place in your scene. And what blueprint actors are is that it's a special kind of actor which has any logic attached to it. So for example, think of it as a statue of a character versus a character that can actually move, that can actually be played by the player, or it can perform certain tasks. So that would make it a blueprint actor as opposed to like a regular actor. Actors can have different elements inside of them. So let's say actors can have a static mesh inside of them, which is going to just appear in the game, or they can have like a collision box, for example, that would control how other objects collide with it. Actors can even have, let's say, audio components. So for example, if you go near an actor inside your game, it would make a sound or something like that. So you can have different elements or different components inside a blueprint actor, and you can also give it logic. You can also give it tasks to perform, and then you can make it sort of do different things. So I hope the idea of an actor is a bit better now. But even if you don't understand it fully right now, just keep watching the video, and I hope by the end of this, it's going to become a lot better. So let me just tell you the idea first. So we're going to play the game, we're going to go near a door, and then we're going to essentially just open it by pressing any key on our keyboard, and it's going to work just like that. So that functionality is going to be built inside of blueprints. So let me just open this. And so now we're inside this blueprint editor. And as you can see, we have different UI elements. Again, we have a viewport, we have a components list. This is similar to the outliner. So everything that is inside this specific blueprint is going to be listed here, just like your outliner. This area is called My Blueprint, and it has different sort of information about your blueprints. It has all your variables. We're going to cover variables in just a bit. It has your graphs, functions, and all that stuff. Don't worry about this too much right now. We're going to go over this in just a bit. And on your right side, we have your you have your details panel, where again, it's similar to this details panel. It's going to have information and different properties that you can tweak of any object that you have selected in the component section. And so if I come to my viewport, and up there, you can see that we have multiple tabs. So if I go to my event graph is where your actual code is going to be. Most of your code is going to be, unless you have different functions and stuff. But we can even close this construction script for now. We don't need that. We just need our event graph. You can see that we have 3 essential nodes here. I'm going to be explaining what these nodes do. The first one is event begin play. This node will be triggered. It's going to run when your game starts. So when you begin playing, when begin play, it just says right there, this node will just run once, and it's not going to run again. This event actor begin overlap is going to run when any other object, for example, our character, overlaps with this specific blueprint. So this blueprint is going to be placed in our scene. Once our character overlaps with it, it's going to run this code, whatever code is plugged in front of this. Event tick, on the other hand, runs basically every tick. So every tick is essentially 1 frame. So if your game is running at 30 frames per second, it's going to run 30 times in a second. So if you want to, let's say, update anything, constantly. So for example, if you have a timer in your scene and you want to update your timer every second or every, tick, then you're going to connect your code to this node. What we're going to be using in this, however, is event begin overlap, because obviously when we get close to the door, that's when we are going to open the door, right? So let's go ahead and go to our viewport first, and let's add some visual elements. So for your visual elements, you can add pretty much anything. You can just go ahead and add a cube if you want. Just search for a cube and add that, or you can add any shape, or you can even get models from Fab. That's what we're going to be doing. So let's go ahead and go to Fab, and let's find ourselves a good door static mesh first. So I'm just going to search for door, and I'm going to go to price, the price filter, and I'm just going to set it to free. And you can see we have a lot of good options there. So you can pretty much select any door that you want. I think I'm going to go with maybe this one, door with handle. I think this looks pretty decent. So we can just add it to project and just wait for it to do its thing. And then once it is added, we can go back to our project. And if we open this, you're going to see that we're going to have a static mesh, which is the door. Perfect. So we're not going to add it to our scene. We're going to add it to our blueprint. So what we can do is we can go to add, and we're going to say static mesh. We're going to look for the static mesh right there, and we're going to add that.
Now, for some reason, it automatically detected that we were trying to add this. However, if, for example, this door doesn't show up, we can just go to the static mesh property right there, and you can just select any mesh that you want, any static mesh. So that's perfect. Our door is in there. Our door is inside of our blueprint, and now we can write code for this door because we're going to move the door and everything, right? So let's go ahead and compile this, and let's go back to our blueprint folder. And now you can see that our blueprint class basically has that door in the thumbnail as well. And now we can just drag this blueprint class on our scene anywhere we want. So let's say we add it right there. Okay. And then what we can do is we can maybe create a wall around it as well. So I'm just gonna go to add shapes, cube, and then I can probably, because obviously because it's a door, we need to add objects around it as well. So we can, perfect. So now you can see that our door is between two objects, and obviously if you were trying to animate an actual door, you would want it to rotate and stuff. But to keep things simple, I'm just gonna move it. I'm just gonna have the door move up, okay? Because that's, I mean, obviously it's not realistic, but we're just gonna move it up. So I'm just gonna show you guys how you can build that functionality. So back in our blueprint editor, what we need now is a box collision. So essentially the way it works is that obviously this object is in your scene, right? But the thing is that this object by default cannot receive any sort of commands. We need a collision object so that when our main character collides with that collision object, then the code is going to be triggered. If that doesn't make any sense, it's perfectly fine. It's going to be clear in just a second. So we can go to add, and I'm just going to search for collision, and we're going to add a box collision to this. So once we add this, we can scale it up like that and move it up as well. So now whenever our actor is going to get within this radius, basically within this box, then the door is going to move up. Okay, we obviously haven't written the code for that, but we're trying to do that. That's what we're trying to do. So with this box collision selected, I'm going to go into my details panel, and I'm just going to go all the way down to events. And on events, we can see this event called on component begin overlap. So if you just add it, if I just press that plus icon right there, it's going to add this new node. This node is going to be basically the same as this node, actor begin overlap. However, this node is specific for the box collision. So we're going to be using this. So you can see that this has a lot of different pins, and all these pins are going to give different sort of outputs. However, to execute code from this or to run code from this, we're going to have to drag off of this pin, which is this larger pin, which is called the execution pin. So we're going to drag off of this, and we're going to call for a node called add actor offset. Now we're going to add this add actor local offset. This node basically allows you to move your object in any way you want. So if we increase the Z value here, it's going to move, the door is going to move up in the Z axis. So that's what we're trying to do. Now you're going to be wondering one thing, how did I know that this node existed? There's many different types of nodes in Unreal Engine 5, and the only way you're going to learn about them is either by reading the documentation of Unreal Engine 5 or by just experience and just by watching tutorials, watching courses. You're going to learn about different nodes, and you're going to learn about different functionalities. In the start, it's going to seem like magic, like how does this person making the tutorial know about this node? But trust me, as time goes on, as you get more and more experience with Unreal Engine 5, you're going to learn about more and more nodes. But for now in this course, whatever nodes I'm introducing to you guys, just try to like memorize them and try to like remember them, that they exist, and whenever you want to sort of use them, you can use them. So I can just set the Z value to 230. And now what's going to happen is if I compile this, make sure to compile your code all the time, because if you don't compile it, it's not going to apply the changes and your code is not going to run. So now if I go ahead and play, and if I go near it, you're going to see that it's going to open. It actually moved way higher for some reason. So we can maybe reduce the value. I'm not sure why it did that, but you get the idea that it actually works. Let's do like 150 or something like that, maybe. And go ahead and play. And if I move it up, you're going to see that it just goes up. Perfect. So now our door opens for us. So that's how it works. The only problem right now is that when we move away from the door, it doesn't close back. So we want to add that functionality as well. And that's pretty simple. What we can do is we can go back to our viewport, select our box collision, and right under on component begin overlap, we also have on component end overlap. So this is going to be triggered when we are not overlapping this box anymore. So we can just click plus on that. And now what we can do is we can just select this node, copy it and paste it here to duplicate it basically. And we can plug this back in. But this time our Z value is going to be minus 150 because we're going to bring it back 150 units. So this node is going to send it up 150 units. And this node, when the overlap ends, is going to send it back So send it down 150 units. So now if you go ahead and play it, what's going to happen is that it's going to cause an error. And I'll show you guys the error first, and then I'm going to tell you guys the reason for that. So if I go and go near it, you're going to see that it's going to say infinite loop detected. The reason for this is because what's happening is that the collision box is pretty small, right? So when this door, or when the blueprint moves up, it ends the collision with the character, right? Because the character is not tall enough to still be colliding with the door. And then it comes down, and then it goes up, and then it comes down. It's basically an infinite loop. And the reason why that happens is because our collision box is too small. So what we need to do is we need to just select our collision box like that, and just increase the scale in the z-axis, something like that, so that even when it goes up, it still is colliding with our character. So that's something important. And I know it's going to be a little confusing. Honestly, this is like a very niche and specific issue, so like don't worry about it. Even if you don't understand it, it's perfectly fine. So now if I go ahead and go near it, you're going to see it's going to go up. It doesn't go up as much, so we probably need to increase the offset 230 and minus 230. Cool. Now if you go ahead and play it, and you're going to see it goes up, and then if we move away, it goes back down. So that's how blueprints work. Essentially, you can add functionality to your game. You can animate things. You can also add like timers. You can add, maybe you can add other characters and then have them look at you and then attack you, chase you, and all that stuff. We're going to be covering all that when we're making our actual game. But this is just an introduction to blueprints, and I just want to show you guys how you can sort of, do different things. So another thing that I'm going to show you guys is maybe let's add a cube. And this is also a basic example that is used by a lot of people to teach blueprints. We're going to have a collision box around this, and whenever we enter that collision box, this cube is going to change colors. So you can do that as well. So for that, I'm going to have to create a new blueprint class, actor, and I'm just going to call this cube. And we're going to go inside it. We're going to add a cube. And once we have our cube, we can also go ahead and add a box collision. So collisions are pretty important in blueprints because for your object to collide with anything, there needs to be a collision box. So just keep that in mind. And scale it up like that. We can set it to be the same size as the cube, or you can maybe make it bigger. I'm going to make it bigger so that we don't have to go right next to the cube. And maybe even make it bigger like that. Something like that should be good. And so now what we can do is we can select our box. We can go all the way down to on component begin overlap. And then we can drag off of this, and we can say set material. And then in parentheses, we're going to select the one which says cube, because we're going to change the material of the cube. So that's that. And once you have this node, you can see that we also have this cube plugged in, so that automatically comes with it because that is the target of this node. So the target of a node means which object of your scene is this node affecting. So this node will affect this cube, if that makes sense. And then we can just select a material. So what we're going to have to do for this is we're going to go and create a new material like that. And I'm just going to call it new material. Doesn't matter. We're just going to delete it afterwards anyway. And then what we can do is we can say, just increase the emissive color. So make it bright orange, something like that. And base color, we can also make it orange or yellow. Cool. So that's our material ready, and it's called a new material. Now we can go back to our blueprint editor and just select that material. So it was called new material. Perfect. So now what's going to happen is that if I add this to my viewport, by default, this cube is not going to have that material, this orange emissive material. But if we go close to it, then it's going to have that material. So let's try it to see if it works. Let's go close it. Let's go near it. And you can see that it worked. Perfect. And we can add the same functionality to this as well. We can basically just say, select the box collision, go down, and on component end overlap, we can just duplicate this node, copy and paste, and make sure to plug in the target to be the same cube, because we're changing the material of the same cube, right? So the target needs to be the same. And then we can plug this in, and we can set the material back to, I think it's called default material or something. Let's open the cube and see which material it has. It has the basic shape material. Okay, so we can set it back to that. Basic shape material. So now if I compile this and I try to play it, it should only change the material while we're close to it. So we're close to it, changes the material. If you move away, it's going to change the material back. Perfect. So that's how you can, add different functionality to different parts of your game. That's how it works. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you guys understand this basic introduction of blueprints. So now I'm going to show you guys another example of how to use blueprints. I'm going to show you guys a slightly more advanced example. And in that, what we're going to do is that we're going to basically add a UI element. So we're going to add a heads up display kind of thing, and it's going to have a number. And then we can, so for example, if you go near a cube or something like that, that number increments. So the reason why we're going to do that is because I'm going to introduce you guys to variables with that. I'm going to introduce you guys to casting. We're going to understand what casting is in blueprints. That is a slightly more advanced concept, but I'm just going to give you guys a basic introduction of it. And I think it's going to be pretty good for you guys to understand how that works. So let me introduce you guys to a different type of blueprint. That is a widget blueprint. So what a widget blueprint is basically it's any UI element that is displayed on top of your game. So I think this also has a UI element. Yeah, like you can see the crosshair, this crosshair right there, and like this ammo and everything like that those are basically widget blueprints, and we're going to be adding our own widget blueprint now. So we can right click anywhere, we can go to user interface, and then we're going to select widget blueprint. And then just select user widget, and you can call this whatever you want. I'm just going to call this counter, because basically it's just going to be a number which is going to start with 0, and every time we go near this cube it's going to update. So I just want to show you guys how you can sort of do that. And we can just open this counter widget blueprint, and if I make this full screen, you can see that this has a completely different UI. This is more like Photoshop or any other photo editing or photo compositing software. You can have different elements like text, buttons, and all that stuff. And this is basically used to create the UI of your game. So start menu, settings menu, those things are all made inside of the UI editor. So this is another thing that you guys will be using in Unreal Engine 5. This again is going to seem a bit intimidating. This animation, this whole animation area, we're not even going to need. So let's just cross it out. And what we can do is we can just add simply a text, and we can just drag that in. But before that, whenever you're making anything inside of this Unreal Engine UI designer, what you need to do is you need to search for canvas and just add a canvas panel on your, just drag it inside in the middle. And what that's going to do is that it's going to create like a boundary or like sort of like a canvas for you to add elements on. And that's an important first step that you always do. So yeah, just do that. Now I can cross this out, and I can just add a text. Select and just drag a text in like that, and I can just maybe place it like there, somewhere there. And then with this text selected on the right side, you're going to see that there's a details panel, and we have a whole bunch of different things that we can change about this text. So you can see the content of this text is right there. We can just start it with 0, maybe something like that. You can change the font, so font size, font family, all those settings you can change here. I'm just going to increase the font size, and you have a lot of different other options as well. We're not going to be covering everything right now, but later on when we're designing the UI of our game, then we're going to cover some of these settings. So now that we have this UI element created, what we're going to do is that we're going to have to display this, because by default, if I just cross this out and play my game, you're going to see that it's not going to be displayed. So there's a method to displaying UI widgets. The way you can do that is by going to your game mode. It contains the main logic of your game, and it contains sort of the logic that is run when your game starts. That's where that is stored. And how exactly can you access your game mode? It's pretty simple. All you need to do is you need to go to your details panel. And again, here we have some tabs. So you can go to world settings. If you don't see this here, what you can do is you can go up to window and then make sure that world settings is enabled. Then you're going to see it right there. And then you can see that we have this game mode override, and it's GM_shooter. That is our game mode blueprint. Now I know this is getting a bit intimidating and a bit confusing, but just hang in there for a second. It's all going to make sense. So with this, what we can do is we can just press this icon right there, which is going to browse over there in our content browser so that we can open it and basically modify the code in it. Now, if you look at this code, what's going to happen is that this node is going to be triggered as soon as the game starts, event begin play. What this is doing is that this is creating a UI overlay widget, and it's adding it to Viewport. Now you might be wondering, what widget is this? This is the widget that has this crosshair and also this weapon. What do you call it? Weapon, I think it's an ammo counter or something like that. But yeah, so that is what it's doing. So what we're going to do is that right after this widget is created, we can drag off of this And we can create another widget. We're going to say create widget like this. Create widget, just search for that, click it. And then in the widget class, we're going to search for our counter. So that's the counter widget that we just created. So just add that. And now what's going to happen is that it's going to be created, this widget, and we can drag off of this again and say add to viewport. Add to viewport, and the target of this is going to be the return value of this. What this does is that this tells this viewport node, add to viewport node, that we're going to add this widget to the viewport, if that makes sense. Now what's going to happen is if I compile this and if I play the game, our widget that we just created is visible on our screen. So that's perfect. Now, how exactly do we modify this? For that, we're going to need a variable. So let's go ahead and go back to our blueprint folder and let's go back to the blueprint of our cube. So inside here, we're going to go to the variable section and we're going to create a new variable. And I'm just going to call this counter. And we have a whole bunch of variable types. But before we understand variable types, let me give you guys a basic overview of what a variable is. Variables are essentially containers of information that contain different types of information that you can change. Because they're variable, your information inside them is also variable. It can vary. And so in this case, what we're going to use it for is basically to store the number inside the counter. So let's say if we set it to an integer, integers are numbers basically. So this variable in the start of the game is going to be 0, right? But every time we overlap this box, we're going to increment it by 1. We're going to say the new value of the counter variable is the existing value of the counter variable plus 1. We're adding 1 to it every single time. And then that variable, the reason why it's useful is because we can take that variable and we can say inside this counter widget blueprint, this text is just going to display whatever that variable has. So this text will always have the text that is inside this variable, if that makes sense. So that is why we use variables. Now I understand this concept if you're completely new to programming, if you're completely new to game development. I know that this concept is going to be slightly confusing. There's no problem with that. It is perfectly fine. You will eventually understand it better. And I hope you guys will sort of get a better understanding as you move on. If you don't understand every single thing at this point, it is perfectly fine. It is perfectly normal. Just try to understand as much as you can, and eventually things will become a lot clearer. And now let's move on to our variable types. So your variable can hold a lot of different types of information. Now, although in Unreal Engine 5, there's a lot of different types of variables, I'm just going to be covering the basic and important ones. So the first one is going to be a Boolean variable. What a Boolean variable is that it stores a true or a false value. So it's either a yes or a no, true or false. It's not going to contain anything else. The next important one that we have is integer. Integer basically has any sort of number, any sort of whole number, which doesn't have any decimal value. Then we have float, which is a floating point number, which basically is a decimal number. After which we have string. String is basically any string of text, any like sort of sentence or any word, which has alphabets. And so the ones that we just covered are the most important types of variables. There are some others as well, but they're way more complex. So I'm not going to be going into them just now. But the variable type that we want for this variable is going to be integer. So once we set it to integer, we can compile it and we can set a default value for the counter variable. So default value, we want it to be 0. That is perfectly fine. And then what we can do is we can say every time that we overlap with this collision box, after it sets the material, what you can do is you can say set counter. We can set counter to a new value. Okay, set counter, and whatever number you type in here, the counter variable is going to be set to that. However, we don't want to set it to a specific value. What we want to do, if you recall, is we want to take the previous value of counter and we want to increment it by 1. So for that, we're going to have to get counter and we're going to have to add 1 to it. And then we're going to set counter to that value, if that makes sense. So how exactly do you get the current value of counter? You can simply just select this counter right there, drag it in, and then it's going to give you an option of either getting counter or setting counter. We're just going to say get counter. And then if you drag off of this, you can search for plus. If you write plus on your keyboard, or if you write add, both of them work. Then you're going to see this operator node, which is going to be plus. And so basically what that's going to do is that's going to take the value of counter. It's going to add it to this number, whatever you type here. In our case, we're going to say 1. And then this output is going to go inside this new counter. So I hope that makes sense. What we're doing is that we're getting the current value of the counter, we're adding 1 to it, and we're setting the new value of counter to that new value basically. So I think our logic here is complete. We can just compile this. And now we're going to basically bind this number to that counter variable. So what we can do now is we can just select that text, and also we can increase the size of this to cover the whole thing. Doesn't really matter, it just triggers my OCD. So with this selected, what we can do is we can go to our content, and where it says text, you're going to see this button next to it. This is basically the binding button. So if you click this and you say create binding, it's going to take you to this completely different UI. And here what's going to happen is that whatever value you plug into this return node, that is the value that's going to be displayed, if that makes sense. So what we want to do essentially right now is we want to basically go inside this cube blueprint, and we want to get this counter variable, and then we want to just plug this into the return node. Now, how exactly do we do that? Because we can't, if you right click and say counter, get counter, set counter, we don't have access to any of those variables. Now that is something very important, because any variable that is inside one blueprint is not accessible by other blueprints by default. We need to make them accessible, and the way we do that is by using casting. So what we're going to do is that we're going to right click and we're going to say cast to cube. Cast to cube. If you do that, what this node will do is that it's going to give you access to the cube blueprint. And basically, once you have this node, if you drag off of as cube, you can pretty much do anything that you could do inside the cube blueprint. So you can say get counter, and you can see that we have get counter there. Without this node, we wouldn't be able to get the cube. And then we can just plug this into the return value, and it's going to add another node automatically, because this variable type, the green one, is integer, but the return value is text. So that's another variable type. So it's going to convert it to text. So it's going to take the integer, convert it to text, and then it's going to display it. So if I just organize things correctly, I'm going to have to take this get text, plug it into this, and then plug this into the return node. So that's going to be the execution pins. Those are going to be the execution pins. That's going to be the sequence to execute things, essentially. And now we also need to plug something into this object. What we're going to do is that we're going to say get actor of class. Now this is a bit confusing. You probably will find this a bit confusing, especially if you don't know object-oriented programming. I'm going to give you guys a quick explanation, but if you don't understand it, it's perfectly fine. On a beginner level, you don't need to understand this. Just know that we have to do this. And eventually it's going to make sense to you, trust me. The reason why we do this is because this cube is a class. It's not an object. And this instance inside the game is an object. So we need to get that object of this class. Again, if that made no sense to you, it's perfectly fine. It is a bit complex. You don't need to understand it at a basic level. You will eventually understand it, trust me. And yeah, we can just plug this in here and this in there, because we need to access this node first. And select class, we're going to set cube. Once we compile this, if we go back and play our game, now our logic should work. So if I go near the cube, it lights up. And also you can see on the top left hand side, our counter is set to 1. Now if I go back, and if I go near it again, it's set to 2. So you can see that's how the logic works. And yeah, so that's how blueprints work. Now I know that last part that we covered is pretty confusing, especially if you're a beginner. It is going to be confusing for you, but it's perfectly fine. As time goes on, you will definitely start to understand more of these things. So don't get demotivated if you don't understand it, and don't sort of like beat yourself over it. I feel like most people don't understand it when they start learning Unreal Engine 5. I personally didn't understand it at all. Like the whole concept of casting was super complex for me, especially because I was like 14 when I was learning it. So yeah, it just fried my brain completely. I hope you guys understood at least something from this part. And I know it's complex. I know blueprints are slightly more complex than some of the other topics that we've been covering. But just trust me, it's going to get better with time. With that being said, let's move on to the next part. Alright guys, now let's go ahead and get started with our first project. But before we start, I just want to give you guys an overview of what exactly is that we're building, just to get you guys excited and tell you guys the scope of the project that we're building. So if I go ahead and play this game, you can see that we have a forest environment and we have a first person character. We can walk around and stuff. And we have, like a forest environment. And then we have this weapon in front of us. If we take that weapon, you can see that we equipped it. We have a score system, a score on the top left-hand side of the screen, ammo on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. We have a crosshair, and then we have these targets that we can shoot. So for example, if I shoot this target, you can see that it's going to go flying away, and basically it's going to look pretty good. Apart from that, we can just shoot these, and you can see on our top left hand side our score is increasing and our ammo is decreasing on the bottom left hand side. You have a limited amount of ammo, and you can find these targets, and you need to sort of just hit all of them before you run out of ammo. So that is the purpose of this game.
And yeah, it's a super fun game that we're going to build, and we're going to learn a lot in this. So I hope you guys are excited, and you can see the environment also looks pretty realistic. We're going to build everything from scratch. This whole environment we're going to build using procedural content generation in Unreal Engine 5. And I hope you guys are super excited. So let's go ahead and get started with this project, and I hope you guys will learn a lot. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching this course up to this point. I hope you guys are enjoying a lot. I hope you guys are learning as well. I wanted to let you guys know that this course has not ended yet. We have a whole bunch of other things that we want to cover. These are the videos that you just watched. We still have this whole forest project left, and we have this third person cipher shooter game as well. You're going to learn a whole lot in this course. You guys can go to Udemy. The link is going to be in the description, and you guys can get this course at a very low price right now. In this YouTube video, we only covered about 2 hours of content, but we have like 6 more hours of content in this course. So I hope you guys are excited to continue. The link is going to be in the description. You guys can go check it out. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.